Bourgeoisie produces, above all, art zone. Gravediggers.
Hello, friends.
Hello, listeners. It's your friendly Das Criminal episode coming live. Well, not live. We're recording live. This fine Monday when you hear it. It's Armor from Toronto.
And it's Erin from No Longer in Quarantine. I'm still in the same apartment that I was quarantining in, but I'm out. I'm out.
Yeah, she's no longer Saddam Hussein.
My first day out was Friday, and I just walked and walked and walked and walked outside. I couldn't stop smiling.
Was it like a nice walk? Was it a pleasant day?
Oh, it was amazing. Yeah, the weather was great. There were lots of people, all with masks on, all respecting social distancing outside, having a nice time. It was lovely.
Yeah, that makes sense. It seems that everywhere except America, everyone seems committed. Well, America and some parts of Britain, everyone seems committed
Yeah.
to, masks and stuff.
A quick note, however. So now that I am out of quarantine, I'm going to be moving shortly, and I might not have regular Wi-Fi for a few weeks. I'm going to try my best to find my way around this. Hopefully we can post content regardless, because I bought a Wi-Fi card that should work for my phone so I can hotspot my laptop to my phone. But we just want to let you guys know this is the situation. If our content is a little bit different or delayed, that's why. Nothing bad has happened to us. Don't worry about it. Today's episode is a total ruckus. One might even say it's full of mayhem.
Can we add a drum roll there or something? Like,
we do want to give a content warning here. This episode includes violence, descriptions of gore, animal abuse, self-harm, and suicide. If you are having thoughts of suicide, please reach out to someone. We will include a link listing international hotlines in the description. There is a film available on Hulu about these events called Lords of Chaos, based on a book of the same name. Please be warned, the film is strikingly graphic and includes all the themes that we just mentioned. If you're upset by blood and gore, it's not the film for you.
It's kind of a very disturbing, but also very surreal in a sort of dark but hilarious way case.
It's like a slasher film.
Yes.
So if you go looking for more stuff about this case, there's a lot of it out there, but we just want you to know that film in particular, Lords of Chaos, is pretty graphic. Don't go into it eating anything. That's my advice. And I had to look away several times.
So I assume by now, if you're still with us, then you're entering a very interesting episode.
Abandon all hope, ye who enter here. We are about to embark upon a dark and twisted journey into the Black Circle, the infernal heart of Norway's black metal scene. On this adventure, we will encounter ear-splitting music, edgelords, Satanism, arson, Nazis, and murder. Buckle up, it's a sinister ride. Our story begins in the 1980s and 90s in Norway. As many of us know, Norway is a Scandinavian country with a present-day population of about 5.5 million people, famous for its fjords and a social safety net. In 1973, Norway founded its national oil company, Statoil. The company began turning a net profit in the early 1980s. This oil money funds many public initiatives in Norway. To this day, political debates often concern the spend versus save ratio of these profits.
Yeah, Norway is also not a member of the European Union, although it does participate in the European Economic Area and is a signatory to the European Free Trade Association. In 1972, a referendum to join the EU failed by a slim margin. That result was also repeated in 1994, and since then, Norway sort of remains aloof from its neighbors, largely due to concerns and its desire to maintain a sort of economic independence.
For many Norwegians, life was good. So, it might come as a surprise that what is generally known as the second wave of black metal music arose among the youths of such a pleasant society. But that's precisely what happened. In the late 80s and early 90s, a group of Norwegian bands emerged whose styles included common heavy metal traits like distorted instruments and screaming vocals alongside satanic lyrics and blood-soaked performances. Many bands emerged in this unhallowed genre: Dark Throne, Immortal, Emperor, Enslaved, Satyricon, and Gorgoroth, just to name a few. But the most infamous of them all, and the group central to our story today, is called Mayhem. Mayhem was founded in 1984 by guitarist Øystein Arseth, known to most of the world by his stage name Euronymous, and that's what we'll call him throughout this episode, Euronymous. Something to note, all of these guys have stage names, which they appear to use in real life, and they all have some edgelord occult meaning. Euronymous refers to the Greek demon Euronymous, who oversaw the rotting corpses dwelling in the underworld. But our boy Øystein misspelled the name, probably because he nicked it from Anton LaVey's Satanic Bible, which makes the same mistake.
Amateur mistake, classic. I mean, imagine going to a local Starbucks and giving your name as Euronymous and then getting livid when it's like mispronounced or misspelled. Is this the Nordic version of American MAGA chuds filming themselves in Starbucks, giving a name like Burn the Quran, and then getting mad and red on video for being kicked out?
I think it is, though. Unlike LaVey, however, Euronymous wasn't using the literary concept of Lucifer as a riff on atheism. He is quoted as saying, quote, "The Church of Satan call themselves Satanists because they think it's funny and provoking. They are really atheists and are against the church because it has caused too much evil upon the time. They predicate that Christians are evil and they are the good ones. We are against the Church of Satan because we are against goodness." End quote.
Oh my fucking god.
Yeah, that pretty much sums up Euronymous' position. Anything perceived as good, he and his compatriots rebelled against. They went out of their way to craft evil personas, as if before each decision they thought, what would an evil person do? I will do that. Usually, when people are murdered, true crime podcasts will say things like, "She had such a vibrant personality and really lit up a room." With Euronymous, it's the opposite. He deliberately darkened every space he entered. And if this is where it stopped, making loud music and claiming to be evil to piss people off, we wouldn't be talking about it now. We all need creative outlets, including for emotions like anger, frustration, misery, etc. And if you like heavy metal music, hey, more power to you. If you want to get really into a subculture or aesthetic, so long as it's not harming anyone, that's cool. But Mayhem, and Euronymous in particular, took this stuff to a new level, which I can only describe as edgelord cringe. He started a record shop for metal music in Oslo called Helvete, Norwegian for hell, and founded a label called Death Like Silence Productions. He also declared himself king of Oslo's heavy metal underground, dubbing his in-group, perhaps sarcastically, the Black Circle. Euronymous was obsessed with weeding out the posers and presenting himself as an authentic militant Satanist. It wasn't enough to play music and have people enjoy it. He wanted to have his own little cult devoted to this subculture. This is all, of course, incredibly ironic, as every part of Euronymous' persona was deliberately constructed around what he believed would piss people off the most. If those mainstream Christians said it was red, Euronymous said it was blue. He claimed to oppose, quote, compassion, peace, happiness, and fun, end quote. And he expected his band members and followers to fall in line with his misanthropic views.
This is what baffles my mind with these people. I find that anyone who constantly harps on about not caring what other people think definitely cares about what other people think. In fact, this obsession with being perceived as uncaring or otherwise detached is itself, ironically, like you said, a sign of caring too much. And I mean, if these freaks really didn't care what people thought, they just live normal lives with normal hobbies and, instead of trying to deliberately be provocative.
Yeah, these people also will do really antisocial things and then fabricate an oppression. So they'll like scream at children in the streets to scare them and to be evil. And then when people react by saying, like, yeah, I don't really like those heavy metal kids, they scared my kids, they'll be like, wow, these people, they don't accept us. Like,
yeah, everyone is like a square or like, yeah, it's fucking freaks, yeah.
and it's like, oh, so you deliberately say you hate people, you hate society, you wish you would all go away. And then when people are like, yeah, they seem to have a bad attitude, you're like, wow, you're oppressing me.
Yeah, it goes back to what I said earlier. It's like they go into Starbucks and they're like, my name is satanic, pedophile, murderer, sacrificer, goat ram. And then the barista, the poor barista is confused, presumably, and doesn't write that name. And these people are like, why can't you accept us for who we are?
Yeah, these people are too old for this.
Yeah, it's so pathetic. When I was researching this episode, the only word that keeps coming to my head is pathetic.
Yeah. And as a side note, I hate gatekeeping fan cultures where you cannot enjoy something if your interest is merely casual. Why can't I say I like a band if I listen to some of their songs and might consider seeing a show if they came to my city? Most fandoms aren't like this, but the ones that are can turn people off to something they're just trying to appreciate. Like, you don't have to listen to every Das Criminal episode to call yourself a fan of the podcast. We welcome everyone interested in some edutainment. The last thing we want to do is tell our audience that they have to adopt an entire subculture or fuck off. Liking a podcast or even having a podcast is not a substitute for a personality.
I disagree because I think all of our listeners should tattoo Das Criminal on their foreheads and wear specific garb and give us all their assets as our, cult leaders, gods, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, if you don't, you're a poser.
Yeah, you're a fake, you're a poser, you're an infidel, a barbarian. I'm looking forward to all the checks for all your liquid assets. But in all seriousness, this is very common in gaming, I've noticed. In Reddit threads and like other places on the internet, there will always be comments about how iPhone games or Stardew Valley or The Sims, they're not real games. Even though like they're perfectly normal genres of games. They're fun. People like to play games to have fun. And these games suit a specific need to have fun for a certain group of people. And that's fucking fine. It's the same in sports. Football has gotten much better recently, but there's still like outdated, fossilized people whose response to a female fan would be like, well, could you name the 1961 title-winning squad of whatever club of the jersey she's wearing or whatever? I don't understand it. I want more people to enjoy my hobbies because then, there are more people that I could talk to about them and there'll be a sort of like bonding experience. It seems that some people derive pleasure solely from being miserable and exclusive, and that's kind of sad.
Yeah, it is sad. People are allowed to casually enjoy things. It's okay. It's not going to hurt you.
Unless that thing is Harry Potter. That's banned. That's forbidden.
I like Harry Potter.
I liked it when I was a kid, but all the sort of subculture that grew around it has made me really disdain it. You know what I mean? Like the books in and of themselves are pleasant, but like J.K. Rowling's insufferable attitude online just pisses me off.
Yes. Oh, this is definitely like a death of the author case study. But any subculture where adults base their entire personalities around it strikes me as weird. So like an adult who's super into Harry Potter and like dresses up as Hermione every Halloween and says like, and this is my cat, Hedwig. Like, wee-oo, red flags. Like,
oh, it's hands down. If I meet someone in the first like time or two that we meet, they were like, oh, my Hogwarts house is Gryffindor or Slytherin. You best fucking believe I'm like walking the opposite direction. Fuck off. Fuck off.
Okay. Like many bands, Mayhem's musicians came and went, so trying not to get too bogged down in details, we're going to touch on the few that are most important to our story. The first, of course, is leader Euronymous, whom we've already introduced. The second is Swedish-born vocalist Per Olin, known mostly by his nom de guerre, Dead. Dead had some serious mental health issues. He possibly dealt with Cotard's syndrome, which is the belief that one is dead and walking around as a putrefying corpse. Those who knew him described him as introverted and depressed. He expressed thoughts of suicide to those around him and self-harmed. Dead also reportedly showed an interest in hurting and killing animals, particularly cats. This is a severely worrying sign regarding someone's mental health.
Isn't this a classic sign of sociopathy? I mean, I've read somewhere that it's one of those things that, like, it's a common thread that links almost every serial killer where they start torturing animals at a young age.
Yeah, it's part of the McDonald triad, which is torturing animals, bedwetting, and fire starting. So he definitely had the torturing animals part, but regardless, someone who does that is picking on something small and defenseless that they can hurt. It's a really, really bad sign.
Yeah, and it seems like they derive pleasure from observing pain in other creatures, which is, again, a disturbing sign.
Yeah, and the people around him describe this as like, oh, he just really didn't like cats. Like, what? So? There's a dog that yaps all day where I live. I'm not going to go outside and kick it.
Yeah, that's just like fucking hell.
Yeah. Dead managed to surround himself with a group who not only ignored the seriousness of his self-harm and suicidal ideation, but actively encouraged this behavior as part of their authentically evil black metal scene. In his application to sing for Mayhem, for instance, Dead sent Euronymous a demo tape and included in the envelope a decaying, crucified little mouse. While most of us would read that as disturbing and encourage Dead to seek psychiatric help, Euronymous thought it was really metal and took Dead into the band. During his sets, Dead liked to wear corpse paint, which is pretty much what it sounds like, painting your face black and white to resemble a corpse. This is now pretty common among black metal musicians, but it was pretty innovative when Dead was doing it. Mayhem's fans thought this was pretty cool, and why wouldn't they? Face paint can add a compelling aesthetic to a performance. I dressed up as a skeleton for Halloween last year and used black and white paint on my face to tour the city and drink mojitos. It's not that deep. And if this were the extent of Dead's morbid tendencies, we could just end the episode and everyone could go home.
You heard it here, folks, first. Erin culturally appropriated Mexican culture and is therefore cancelled. Actually,
this was in Ireland, and that kind of face paint is part of Samhain. So.
Owned! Absolutely owned!
Yeah, but we went on this ghost-themed tour around Dublin that I made us sign up for, and tickets were €35 a piece or something ridiculous, and I was the only one wearing a costume.
Was no one else wearing? Why? It's Halloween. I thought, don't people wear costumes in Halloween over there?
It wasn't on Halloween, it was 2 days before, but it was the weekend,
yeah, it would be the weekend.
Halloween was on a Tuesday
Halloween,
or something. Yeah, so I don't know. We went to Bad Bob's and Temple Bar, and I just sat at the bar having Irish coffees dressed up with skull paint on.
Were people in the bar wearing costumes?
No!
Well, that's fucking grim. Sounds fucking boring. Doesn't sound like a fun city. No offense.
Dublin, it has its moments.
Okay, fair enough.
But Dead's macabre rituals got much more concerning from there. Before gigs, he allegedly buried his clothes in the ground to dig them up before the show and perform with the odor of decay on his body. Dead also took a rotting dead animal in a jar or a plastic bag, reportedly a crow, to performances so that he could inhale the air from the container and sing with the stench of death in his nose and lungs.
Okay, if it wasn't for Norway's generous social welfare system and universal healthcare, I'm pretty sure Dead would have, died from a 14th century disease like rickettsial pox from huffing decaying birds, which is why I think we should be against universal healthcare to weed out these freaks.
It's disgusting. It's disgusting.
Yeah, fucking hell.
During Mayhem's shows, Dead often used hunting knives or glass to cut himself while on stage. While most people would be horrified to witness this at a gig, Mayhem managed to cull the posers from the audience by throwing a pig's head into the crowd early on in their sets, or displaying butchered animals on stakes in front of the stage.
Again, see above. How the fuck did this guy not get infected with tetanus or smallpox? He's literally just a walking menagerie of open wounds and decay. I'm pretty sure he'd be pretty much a 5-star hotel or a bus of some sort for all kinds of pathogens, bacteria, and viruses.
I don't even want to think about it. Again, we cannot emphasize enough how the Black Circle found themselves in a spiral of darkness and depravity, where they reinforced each other's most gruesome behavior. We're not talking about a casual fandom where people enjoy playing and listening to music and maybe go to shows or buy merch. We're talking about an extensive subculture whose goal was to be as wicked, incendiary, and oppositional as possible. And you can't say it's just about the music, because once you throw an animal carcass at your audience and tell them they have to accept that or leave, you're roping them into your grotesque theater. The music and makeup are the least troubling parts of this burgeoning subculture. Whether it's a heavy metal band or a string quartet makes no difference if a group glorifies unsafe behavior like self-harm and hazes their fans with severed pigs' heads.
Okay, see, some artists like to involve their fans in their performances, and that's okay. For example, Above and Beyond, which are an electronic dance group, for those of you who don't know, would invite a fan during every live performance to quote-unquote press the button, and that would drop the bass in a particular song. Similarly, Steve Aoki is known for caking fans, which is not a euphemism, by the way. He throws a fully baked cake into the crowd during his sets. I'm not a big fan of that since I consider that extremely wasteful. But, it's his shtick. He throws a large cake into the crowd. But that's a far cry from, throwing dead animals at your fans.
Yeah, as a side note, if I get married and my new spouse does that thing where they shove part of the wedding cake in my face when we cut it, I will immediately file for an annulment. Ruining my expensive makeup and possibly my dress that day to look silly in front of all our loved ones is grounds for dumping someone, in my opinion.
Why dump them? You have a cake knife in your hand. Their jugular is right there.
Oh, I would be so mad, so mad. And anyone who was marrying me would know this.
I mean, consider this. He'd also probably be in the Guinness Book of World Records for being the fastest widow in human history. It was so gross. I do not want to do it. I don't want, it's so stupid. Why? It's such a dumb thing to do.
The cake thing?
Yeah, shoving cake in people's faces, especially if they're wearing nice clothes and they spent a lot of money trying to look nice.
Yeah, it's like shoving someone in a pool too, especially if it's a woman who has her hair and makeup done and you think it's funny that she's upset. It's just so uncool. It's so annoying. Don't be annoying.
Yeah.
But really, could you imagine being like, "Hey Aaron, how was the Kalani concert?" And me replying, "Oh, well, at the beginning, she threw a dead pig at us, so I decided to leave." What a sick thing to do to your fans.
Have you seen the movie The Untouchables with Sean Connery?
Sean Connery? No.
It's basically about Al Capone, and there's a famous line in it where he's like, they send one of yours to the hospital, you send one of theirs to the morgue. And I fully believe in that. So if I go to a concert and the artist throws a dead pig at us, you have to up the ante. I'll go out there, hunt a wild boar or, a bear, a larger animal than a dead pig, like a larger and maybe scarier animal, like tiger, lion, whatever, and bring that corpse back and throw it back at the artist.
Amr is a poacher.
Well, I wouldn't say I'm a poacher so much as a connoisseur of, an eye for an eye.
This subculture wasn't helping Dead cope with his issues in healthy ways. Instead, he became more despondent, and on April 8, 1991, at the age of 22, killed himself by slitting his wrists and throat and shooting his head with a shotgun. It was Euronymous who discovered Dead's body, as they, along with Mayhem's bassist, Necrobutcher, had been living in a dilapidated house together. Instead of calling emergency services, however, Euronymous went to the shop, bought a disposable camera, rearranged some items at the scene, and took photographs of Dead's corpse. Later, Euronymous even used one of these photographs for a Mayhem bootleg album cover. Euronymous also collected pieces of Dead's skull, made them into necklaces, and gave them as gifts to other musicians he deemed worthy. Someone started a rumor that Euronymous also ate part of Dead's brain, but this isn't true. Still, Euronymous was happy to let the story spread around the Norwegian black metal scene, as he thought it made him sound evil, and therefore cool.
Wait, aren't there laws against desecrating corpses? Because if there aren't, I feel like there should be, especially in cases like this.
I know in the United States there certainly are, and you also shouldn't move a body or move things around a body in a circumstance like this. If you think there's any chance that person is alive or could be saved, then yes, you're supposed to administer first aid, of course. But otherwise, if you mess with the scene, say in like the very grim case that that person was murdered, but it was staged to look like a suicide or something like that, you're basically making it impossible for their loved ones to know what really happened to them.
Yeah, you're tampering with evidence.
Yeah, precisely. You're messing with a crime scene. And even if someone kills themselves, that can still be considered a crime scene until it's ruled a suicide.
Yeah, so this guy should be in jail.
Yeah, it's also a disgusting thing to do. And Mayhem's bassist, Necrobutcher, felt rightfully disgusted by this behavior and ended up leaving the band as a result. He's still a metal musician to this day and seems overall like a pretty regular guy who disavows that kind of toxicity, but unfortunately this still wasn't a wake-up call for much of Oslo's metal scene. Instead, Euronymous and his remaining ilk converged around the Helvete record shop. They became more fervent in their so-called satanic beliefs, inching closer to the fringes of Norwegian politics. After Dead's suicide, it was no longer edgy to simply allude to the death drive. One had to live it as well. The Black Circle was vehemently anti-Christian, but they weren't opposed to the commonly cited problems like sexual abuse within the church, misogyny in the Bible, or historical anti-Semitism in Europe's Christian community. Instead, they hated Christianity for brainwashing Europe and Norway in particular with values like, quote, empathy and solidarity, end quote. Naturally, as purveyors of evil, the Black Circle must oppose anything good, like people caring about one another. Whether we agree with the Norwegian metalheads' takes that European Christianity fosters solidarity is not relevant to what comes next, though I suppose I'll note for the record that I find their analysis very flawed. The Black Circle instead took an interest in pre-Christian Norway and, here it is, Nazi esotericism. Honestly, Nazis and white nationalists, or whatever the fuck they're calling themselves now, have ruined pagan theology studies in Europe. I am super interested in learning more about the pre-Christian Celtic religion, but racists have managed to appropriate that field and turn it into something hateful. If I went on a date with someone and he told me he was really into Norse mythology, alarm bells would be ringing in my head.
Interestingly, by the way, the Nazi Party evolved from an occult Volkish group called the Thule Society. And the Thule Society need an entire episode on their own, which we might get into someday. But they were obsessed with pre-Christian Germanic, Norse, and Celtic myths, and held very esoteric beliefs regarding various relics as being essential to wielding power. They also basically funded the Deutsche Arbeiterparty, the DAP, which was the forerunner of the National Socialiste Deutsche Arbeiterpartie, the NSDAP, aka the Nazi Party. Now, there is no evidence that Hitler himself was a part of the Thule Society, but he was mentored by people like Anton Drexler, who were very active with the Thule Society and the DAP. Again, this warrants an entire episode in and of itself, but I just wanted to bring it up as a reference that, yes, if I'm talking to someone and they repeatedly mention Nordic runes, Celtic symbols, Odin, Thor, Germanic myths, that kind of thing, I will slowly step away.
Euronymous would write in a private letter in the early 90s that, quote, almost all, end quote, Norwegian black metal bands at the time were, quote, more or less Nazis, end quote. In his master's thesis on multiplicity, mysticism, and identity in black metal, now Professor Benjamin Hedge Olson writes of some metalheads' inclination toward Nazism, quote, black metal defines itself to a large degree through transgression, alienation, and provocation. And in Western culture, few things are more transgressive, alienating, and provocative than neo-Nazism, end quote. Now, this isn't to pick on Benjamin because I found his thesis fascinating. I think his point here has been twisted by people who retell this story and downplay the fascist leanings of Euronymous' group by saying it was only part of their subversive image. The Black Circle didn't adopt Nazism as an appendage of their performance art because Nazism is edgy. They believed this shit, and they put these ideas into action. I don't think anybody can be casually interested in Nazism. It is a fundamentally racist and fascist ideology. There's nothing soft about it.
What I find incredibly amusing and ironic is that under a genuinely fascist or Nazi regime, these people will definitely be herded into ditches and shot for being, degenerates or decadent or not traditional or conservative enough, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I also find it interesting as a discussion to have about, the comparison between outward behavior and innate beliefs. Where does the line lie between what one person presents to the outside world and one's sort of inner beliefs? Like, for example, I find myself very susceptible to irony jokes, usually making sarcastic remarks, pretending to be Islamist. But usually when I do that, I do so to make fun of Islamism as an archaic and abhorrent ideology. But that being said, I also think the line between the two is quite blurry. And I don't think anyone can really claim a distinction between how they act and what they believe.
I also think if you're going to make ironic or sarcastic comments, or even write satire, you have to do it well, and you have to do it well enough that people understand that's what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's the thing. That's the key. It's about conveying the sarcasm or the satire in and of itself.
We talked about this a little bit, actually, on our Valerie Solanas episode, how a lot of people say that the Scum Manifesto is a brilliant work of satire, and maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but she did shoot Andy Warhol. Like, she did.
Yeah, she acted on that work, basically.
Yes, and these people, as we'll see, will act upon their Nazism.
We're getting to the good parts.
Among these metallic Nazis, one in particular stands out. His given name was Christian, but this, of course, had to be changed, as Christianity is no good. Or it is good, and therefore it's bad. You get the point. As a child, Christian spent about a year in Iraq as his father worked for the government under Saddam Hussein. According to his Wikipedia page, Christian's parents were racists. Quote, when asked about his father, Vikernes stated that he had a swastika flag at home. However, Vikernes feels that his father was a hypocrite because he was worried about Vikernes being a Nazi, whereas he too was pissed about all the colored people he saw in town. About his mother, Vikernes stated that she was very race-conscious in the sense that she was afraid that Vikernes was going to come home with a black girl. End quote. Vikernes' mother would later state that she has no good explanation for why he developed neo-Nazi views. Really? You have no good explanation. The apple doesn't fall very far from the tree. That is your explanation.
Yeah, as a young adult, Christian adopted the name Varg and his nom de guerre, Count Grishnack, and performed in a one-man band called Burzum. By the way, Count Grishnack and Burzum are both references to Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. Olsen explains, Varg Vikernes, the only member of Burzum, church burner and neo-Nazi extraordinaire, was one of the earliest black metaliers to make the connection between black metal and Tolkien. The name Burzum comes from Tolkien. Burzum, meaning excessive darkness in Orcish. Vikernes' early pseudonym, Count Grishnack, was borrowed from Tolkien, Grishnack being a particularly belligerent Uruk-hai. It is significant that Vikernes never uses Tolkien's protagonist as a subject matter. The evil, violent, misanthropic characters are his exclusive interest, end quote. And I just wanted to, refer that for anyone interested, the name Burzum is part of the Lord of the Rings inscription on the One Ring, which, time to nerd out, time to wow some babes with this information. The black language of Mordor's inscription says, Ashnaz Durbatuluk, Ashnaz Grimbatul, Ashnaz Thrakatuluk, Ach Burzumishi Krimpatul, which means one ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. And, Burzum is the darkness.
This Varg guy is an absolute fucking dweeb. I hate everything about him. Just read Lord of the Rings and enjoy it like a normal fucking person. Why do Nazis always have to take cultural things for themselves? Leave Tolkien alone. Leave punk and metal music alone. Leave Norse mythology alone. Just leave everyone else alone. Please, let us enjoy things.
Yeah, fuck, man. I absolutely agree. I really hate how Nazis have ruined Lord of the Rings because it's such a cool world and, cool book. Tolkien, as a writer, was a genius, his politics aside. And the world building of Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and The Silmarillion is pretty much the foundation of modern fantasy. It sucks that it's been appropriated by these freaks. Also, not to be elitist or anything, but, considering our gatekeeping conversation from above, but Burzum and Count Grishnack are basically amateur titles. They're both extracted from Lord of the Rings. If these morons really were Tolkien heads, they'd adopt titles from the Silmarillion, which is, real Tolkien lore. Only true nerds can cite names from the Second Age like Ancalagon, Fingolfin, Fëanor, Caranthir, Gothmog, etc., etc. Sorry, again, just showing off my Tolkien lore.
Christian/Varg/Burzum/Count Grishnack/whatever the hell his name is was signed to Euronymous' Deathlike Silence record label and later replaced Necro Butcher as Mayhem's bassist. But Euronymous didn't have the best track record as a businessman or recording executive. More on that later. In 1992, members of the Norwegian black metal scene began setting fire to churches. Police believe that Varg Vikernes was responsible for the first successful arson attack, that of Fantofstave Church, which was nearly 850 years old and burnt to the ground. Vikernes used a photograph of the destroyed chapel as the cover of one of Burzum's albums. We talk about it all the time on this podcast, but seriously, if you are going to do crimes, do not document your crimes. Do not use them as your album cover. Do not write about them in your diary. This is basic stuff, people. 101 level content. But Vikernes wasn't the only one setting churches alight. Euronymous also became involved, as did other metal scene members like the drummer for the band Emperor, who went by the name Faust. The Goethe reference is a step above the Tolkien reference, in my opinion.
Oh, I totally agree. It's certainly much more esoteric and unique. Today, every other metal band has a Tolkien reference. Pick something new or interesting, like Dune or Watchmen. Call yourself Muad'Dib or Ozymandias, which itself is a reference to Shelley. Much cooler than everyone being like Nazgul or something.
On Christmas Day of 1992, a firefighter was killed while fighting an arson attack on a Methodist church in Norway. Again, these actions aren't elements of provocative performance art. They are violent. When you set a building on fire, this is a foreseeable consequence.
Also, did these people not ever think about the fire spreading? They're not just risking firemen, but entire neighborhoods if something went wrong and the fire, ran wild. But then again, they probably consider it an even bigger victory. Just awful. These people need to be sent to a gulag.
It's really sad, and I don't want that firefighter's death to be glossed over because it is a consequence of all of this.
Yeah, it is. It is a result of their actions. They should be tried for that.
As Nazis, the members of the church-burning gang weren't merely white supremacist and anti-Christian solidarity, whatever that means. They were violent toward gay people too. On the 21st of August, 1992, a gay man named Magne Andreasen made the fatal mistake of propositioning Faust. Faust agreed to go with the man to the Olympic Park as they were in Lillehammer. Once behind the trees, Faust stabbed the man 37 times and kicked his head in, killing him. The next day, Faust told Varg Vikernes and Euronymous about what he'd done, and the three burnt down a church in Oslo together in celebration of this anti-gay hate crime. Lillehammer police, however, were stumped by the crime. Murders by strangers are often the hardest to solve, as they don't usually leave a trail of breadcrumbs like cases where someone harms a family member or friend. And, perhaps because Faust had dirt on them because they'd been setting fire to churches, or maybe because they approved of his actions, nobody else in the Black Circle squealed on Faust. Varg Vikernes probably thought what Faust did was pretty cool, because in an anonymous interview with the Bergens Tidende newspaper in 1993, Count Grishnack claimed to have committed the church arson attacks and killed a man in Lillehammer. Stealing valor from a homophobic murderer is only something an absolute fascist oaf would do. But Varg made a mistake, because the interview wasn't as anonymous as he intended. The black metal musicians told the journalists interviewing them that they'd be shot if they called the police, but for some bizarre reason, Varg let them take his photo while he held 2 knives for the publication. His face was mostly covered, but why? Why do criminals keep doing this?
At that point, you might just get a tattoo on your forehead with, "I did a crime, come arrest me."
In the end, it didn't really matter because police were already on to Varg Vikernes for the church arsons. I mean, he used crime scene photos for his Burzum project. They arrested him for the fires, but as there wasn't enough evidence to prosecute, he was released 6 weeks later. Euronymous decided to close down Helvete record shop, first because he was worried that attention from the press and police would land him and his buddies in jail, but also because Helvete had high overhead costs and Euronymous wasn't turning a profit on the demonic record store.
Yeah, it seems like there wasn't much of a market share for satanic screeching or whatever the fuck passes for music in the metal world. Yeah, I think capitalism is good now.
In early 1993, the relationship between partners in crime Varg Vikernes and Euronymous began to disintegrate. This rupture's exact causes are still unclear. Perhaps it lies in some dispute over Euronymous' handling of Burzum's record deal, or some other financial circumstances. It's also possible that the two developed some sort of power struggle around who was the edgiest metal musician in Norway. On the night of August 9th, 1993, or perhaps in the early hours of the 10th, Varg Vikernes and Snor Blackthorn Rush, a member of another black metal band, drove to Euronymous' flat in Oslo. Varg went inside, and some sort of altercation ensued. That night, Varg Vikernes stabbed Euronymous to death. Varg claims that this was an act of self-defense, but evidence suggests otherwise. First, Varg Vikernes drove to Euronymous' apartment to confront him, not the other way around. And, of the 23 stab wounds to Euronymous' body, 16 were in the back. The other 7 were to the head and neck. Finally, associates of Vikernes and Euronymous, like Blackthorn and Faust, have doubted Vikernes' story.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure self-defense can account for like 10, maybe 12 stabs at a maximum. Nothing explains 23 except a real fucking intent to kill.
Yeah. But that's not all. When Norwegian police apprehended Vikernes for Euronymous' murder, they found 150 kilograms of explosives and 3,000 rounds of ammunition in his home in Bergen. Enough for a significant terrorist attack. Xavier Katarinich writes in the Encyclopedia of White Power, quote, Vikernes states that the substantial amount of explosives recovered from his apartment after his arrest was intended to blow up Blitzhaus, the radical leftist and anarchist enclave in Oslo. Vikernes' plan to destroy the Blitz was reportedly on the verge of execution when his arrest for the murder of Arsith, Euronymous, prevented it from being carried out. End quote. Vikernes later denied these allegations as well, saying that he stockpiled munitions, quote, in order to defend Norway if we were attacked at any time, end quote. But we know that Vikernes had previously used explosives to destroy churches, and that he self-identified as a Nazi in the early 1990s, that he took credit for a homophobic hate crime that he didn't commit, and that he stabbed his former friend Euronymous to death. He has, in my opinion, many of the makings of a right-wing terrorist.
See, we've had this conversation on the pod before, and there are certain issues with this, but my biggest thing is this shit is why the left needs to be armed, trained, and prepared, because the bourgeois state will not interject to defend us. Vikernes just made the rookie mistake of doing a separate crime before his terrorism, thus preventing, the actual terrorism. Also, Vikernes comes from a long line of collaborators in Norwegian history, which was a hotbed for tacit and eventually explicit cooperation with the Nazis before being annexed, and no amount of social democracy can erase that history. Fun fact, the term quisling, which is commonly used to refer to stooge or proxy, is taken from the Norwegian proxy of the puppet Nazi state, the prime minister at the time, Vidkun Quisling.
For the murder of Euronymous, 4 of the arson attacks, and the theft and storage of explosives, Varg Vikernes was convicted and sentenced to the max in Norway, 21 years in prison. Blackthorne received an 8-year sentence for being an accomplice. During the course of the investigation, police also discovered the truth about the murder of Magne Andreasen, the gay man stabbed in Lillehammer, and Faust was sentenced to 14 years in prison. Varg Vikernes was released from prison in 2009 after serving 15 years of his sentence. Norwegian prisons are notoriously more focused on rehabilitation than those in places like the United States, and Vikernes was permitted to focus on his music, crafting entire albums while incarcerated. But while it seems as though Varg has let go of his murderous past, some of the rehabilitation hasn't held. Vikernes posts extremely anti-Semitic content online, finding himself in hot water in his new home country of France for inciting racial hatred. In 2011, Norwegian far-right terrorist Anders Behring Breivik killed 77 people, most of them children at a Workers' Youth League summer camp, in a series of attacks. Shortly before doing this, Breivik sent his racist manifesto to people and organizations who he thought, for any number of reasons, would want to read it. One of these recipients was Varg Vikernes.
Yeah, it sounds to me like Varg may have moved on from that particular murder, but he seems like still a dyed-in-the-wool Nazi. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised, though extremely sad, if the next time we hear about Varg is in a headline about white nationalist terror attack on a left-wing polity or an immigrant group.
Vikernes posted on his blog in 2011 that he sympathized with many of Breivik's political views, but that he believed Breivik himself was actually a tool of some vast Jewish conspiracy. Clearly, Varg's neo-Nazi leanings have not changed.
Man, that fucking rules. I love how Varg's gatekeeping with metal music bleeds into his Nazism. Like, Breivik inarguably contributed more to the Nazi cause, and the sentence sounds awful, but from a sort of ideological and materialist perspective, sure, than Varg. But Varg still insists this guy is like a reptile deepfake bot instead of another Nazi. No one is a real Nazi but me. That's his perspective.
Vikernes currently maintains a YouTube channel where he spouts white nationalist talking points. In a video that I watched, so you don't have to, Vikernes addresses the question, is he a white supremacist? No, Varg argues, because he doesn't believe that white people are superior to other races, but that each race is biologically suited for its native environment and that the races should not mix. According to Varg, Europe is best suited for Europeans and therefore belongs to Europeans. But not to worry, white Americans, as North America is also best suited for Europeans, so colonialism is acceptable.
What do these people say about Latin America, I wonder? Also, tangentially, this rhetoric is pretty much overlapping with this weird and quite insufferable sort of post-colonial leftist types on Twitter. The sort of weird leftists who think that, a white woman dating a man of color is like wrong because of some vague references to power dynamics, which essentially boil down to being against racial miscegenation. And this is why, for me, any leftist who espouses some idiotic notion of people not dating due to race, class, gender, identity, basically should be dismissed as a freak.
These are all racist talking points that Vikernes tries to disguise by focusing on the meaning of the word supremacist rather than the sentiments and implications of his ideologies. YouTube Talking Skull Sean has a great video on this called What is White Supremacy? A Response to Steven Crowder, which breaks down this matter remarkably well. Basically, plenty of racists try to distance themselves from that label by arguing over the semantics of phrases like white nationalist and white supremacist. Don't fall for it. If you pay attention to certain fan cultures, however, you'll note that so many people are quick to forgive their faves for egregious displays of racism, sexism, and homophobia, etc., so long as those musicians insist they aren't bigoted.
Case in point, PewDiePie. I don't know if you know him, but he's a gamer who sort of streams. And he's used the N-word multiple times in Twitch streams and basically brushed it off as a heated gamer moment. And has also worn a shirt with the Iron Cross on it, a Nazi symbol, but claims he's not a Nazi or racist. And his fans lap it up like hogs in a sty. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've never been in a situation frustrating enough to warrant using racial slurs, but, what do I know?
No, and I would never be frustrated and have racial slurs slip out or something because I don't use them.
Yeah, exactly.
Public or in private. It's just not something that I would say. The same way when I feel frustrated, I don't start speaking Italian because I don't speak Italian.
Hey, mamma mia.
Amr, that's racist.
Forget about it.
At a 2016 benefit concert called Dimebag, well-known heavy metal musician and former Pantera lead singer Phil Anselmo closed the show by doing a Nazi salute and yelling "White Power." Anselmo later tried to claim he's not racist by saying, quote, "I fucking love everyone, I fucking loathe everyone, and that's that," end quote. And while plenty of the metal community, including other musicians, condemned Anselmo and called out his actions as racist, some fans still whine in comment sections, "No, Phil Anselmo isn't racist. He said racism is bad. He said he loves all people." Guys, if it does Nazi salutes like a racist and screams white power like a racist, it's a racist.
Okay, what boggles my mind here is how hollow this excuse is, because if these people really weren't racist and just wanted to be transgressive for provocation's sake, why don't they do something like a socialist salute and yell power to the people? I mean, considering the history of the left and the countless state-sanctioned assassinations, coups, murders from Orlando Letelier, see episode 24 of our show, to Fred Hampton, that act itself would be infinitely more provocative than goose-stepping like a fucking oaf and Sieg-hailing a crowd. Also, it's the same mentality that really pisses me off when, the New York Times will publish an op-ed from Tom Cotton calling for deploying the military against protesters, and then they'll stand by it claiming free speech. But if you're really supporting free speech, why are you not publishing, I don't know, a Maoist third worldist in your fucking editorial? It's the same principle, really.
Yeah, the song WAP is provocative because it features women rapping about their sexual arousal. So you don't have to be racist to provoke people. It's very possible to just make interesting art and music that people will discuss. If we're going to judge artistic value of a piece by the strength of the reactions it provokes, then wet-ass pussy goes in Louvre.
Okay, speaking of West Aspasi, Aaron, I need to let you know that according to my friend Ben Shapiro, whose wife is a doctor, it is a medical condition and they shouldn't be normalizing this disorder.
That's my point, though. That's my point. They were able to provoke an absolute nerd like Ben Shapiro to give some response that really squeals on himself.
Oh, it's the fucking best thing of 2020, honestly.
So Cardi B is who Varg Vikernes wishes he could be.
Oh, absolutely.
The argument about recognizing Nazis goes for Varg Vikernes as well. He has proven time and time again through his actions, from stockpiling weapons to defend Norway or blow up a leftist collective, to defending Anders Breivik, he is a violent racist. Do not believe him when he says otherwise. He has shown us who he is. I would also say when one of your faves, when someone whose music or art you enjoy does something racist, do not try to defend that by saying, oh, they're not a racist, they're not a sexist, whatever the thing is. No, no, no. You say, yeah, that was racist. However, I really like their art. And for me, I can separate it. For me, that is more important to me than turning my back on this person's body of work. Like, take responsibility for that. Stand by your principles.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Absolutely.
And I might have different morals and different principles than you, but at least make your case rather than trying to argue that someone who does a Nazi salute and yells white power on stage is not racist. Like, you are the one who has to say, okay, that was racist. He is racist. However, I really like his music. I still want to listen to it. That's not important enough to me to stop listening to it. You have to admit that.
Yeah, pretty much. I completely support that. I think, yeah, for me, like, for example, I was in a similar situation many years ago when a player by the name of John Terry was playing for Chelsea, and an entire controversy arose when he was caught on camera. Not that there was no audio, but like mouth reading experts basically determined that he said, "You fucking black cunt" at a black player. And his claim was that he was repeating what the black player said to him, accusing him of saying it. His response was, yeah, the camera only caught the last bit, which is a fucking absurd response if you ask me. But also, as a Chelsea fan, I recognize that he was a very good defender and a good football player in the team. But I'm not going to be defending his character or moral fabric. He was a racist. He's a racist, really is. I dislike him as a person. I fundamentally think he's not a good person. He's a horrible person. But playing for Chelsea, he contributed a lot to the team winning. I will never like him. I will never appreciate him. I'll never wear a jersey with his name on it. But his contributions to the team from a purely athletic perspective, I don't think can be denied. Basically, the death of the author, but if it was sports.
O.J. Simpson is the best running back of all time, and he killed 2 people.
Yeah, and is also a dick, apparently.
We can acknowledge that a person makes art that might be aesthetically appealing in some way, and also that they're a jerk. You are the person who has to set your principles and say whether you will listen to or not listen to that music. And like, I used to love Bob Dylan. I saw Bob Dylan in concert. I even dressed up as Bob Dylan for like this one thing. It's a long story. But then I found out that Bob Dylan is a supporter of Israel and Israel's crimes against the Palestinians, and I have never listened to his music since.
Yeah,
I cannot do it.
Respect that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I felt so personally betrayed by that someone who I respected so much would have hate in their heart for something that is so dear to me. It hurt. It hurt to find that out. But I actually feel more liberated that I don't worship at the altar of someone who has views that I so disagree with.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely respect that, upholding your principles.
That's the story of Norway's black metal murders. We hope you've enjoyed this episode and hopefully gotten some things to consider. Our biggest goal with this podcast, aside from simple entertainment, is that our listeners always come away with different ideas to chew on or, ways of thinking that they haven't examined before.
Just to add to that, if all else fails, I hope you learned from this episode and from our podcast as a whole not to document your crimes, not to announce your crimes, not to video your crimes, not to take photos of the crime scene, and certainly not to make interviews claiming crimes you didn't do and stealing valor from actual criminals.
Yeah, I'd say about half of the crimes we cover on this podcast are uncovered because people brag about them. It's absolutely bizarre behavior.
Yeah, it's deranged.
So, just a reminder, I might be in a little bit of a Wi-Fi blackout soon due to moving internationally and setting everything up here. We record Das Criminal remotely, which requires good Wi-Fi and a quiet, comfortable place for both of us. This is looking unlikely for me for the next few weeks, though I did purchase a Wi-Fi card for my phone that should be of some help, so we'll give that a shot next week. The main problem is that the country I'm in requires an alien residency card to purchase home internet access, and getting that card is a whole bureaucratic process that just takes a while. It's made even longer by COVID. So nothing has gone wrong here at Das Criminal headquarters. It's just taken some time, that's all.
Yeah, we'll keep posting, at least on Instagram, and let you know what's happening.
Yeah, we still plan on releasing content. We just want to let you know, just in case the Wi-Fi thing doesn't work out, what's happening. We don't want you to think we've abandoned you or abandoned the podcast. That is not the case.
Yeah, or died for that matter.
You can join us if you are interested on Patreon, www.patreon.com/dascriminal. We have a mini episode coming out this Wednesday for our devoted fans. We also post on there full-length bonus episodes, current events episodes like this Wednesday, shout-outs, polls. You get more participation in our podcast crafting process, and you can support Das Criminal, so our hosting fees, internet bills, literature, plus the time we put into the show. So that Wi-Fi card that I bought, which works for 30 days, was $70. So
Jesus Christ.
That's where our Patreon money for the month goes.
Does it have a limit, like the amount of gigabytes, or?
No, it does not.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Yeah. It just has a limit of 30 days. And then after 30 days, I still won't have that alien residency card. So I'm probably going to spend $140 on Wi-Fi in 2 months, which is so annoying. But we are devoted to you, our dear fans, and therefore we'll buy an overpriced Wi-Fi card.
Yeah, please recommend us to your friends, your family. We are putting a lot of work into this show, and we would love it if it spreads and grows. We are the opposite of the subjects of this episode. We're not gatekeepers. The more the merrier.
Yeah, send this to your friend who likes metal music.
Yeah, everyone has that friend.
My boss was trying to get to know me and asked what kind of music I listened to, and I said like some pop, some rock. And he said he listens to metal, and I was like, oh, have you heard about the Norwegian black metal murders? And then I realized this was my boss, and I probably sound like an absolute freak.
I mean, either that or he'll be impressed with your esoteric knowledge.
No, I think he was impressed, but he started talking more about metal music, and I had to say, listen, I don't actually like metal music. I like crime and murder.
Yeah, that certainly is much better.
You can follow us on Instagram if you so please at Das Criminal Pod, where we post images that correspond with our episodes, maps, things like that. You have our word that the images we post will always be like innocuous pictures of the band. We're not going to post the gory images that we mentioned earlier. That's disgusting. We would never do that.
Yeah. Have a good week.
Thanks for listening, guys. We'll see you hopefully next Monday for a very interesting episode that I'm really excited for.
Yeah, adieu, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.